This evening. Dr. Omar, let me start with you. And this is a question one of our Facebook followers, Moses Ocheng, has asked earlier on. He asks, how come some patients of coronavirus are recovering, yet there is no known cure of the disease? Understanding that there are 113,120 cases of recovery, how does one recover from a disease that has no cure as of now?
Thank you, Abubakar. So the answer to this is that our bodies are made in such a way that they have their own defense mechanism. So that defense mechanism, we call it the immune system, and it comprises of a number of things in the body. So there are cells, there are chemicals, and that the body itself produces to fight anything that is foreign. Not just viruses, not just bacteria, anything that is foreign is fought by the body. So that is why recovery is because the body fights whatever is foreign. And if Ocheng has followed the discussions around COVID-19, is that the people who get very ill are people whose system are already vulnerable. Either they are suffering from some critical illness, they are elderly, they are pregnant, they already have some weakness in the body. Otherwise, a normal fighting system, yes, of course, you will get ill. Yes, of course, you will feel very bad. You will have fever, you will have symptoms, you may have problems breathing, you will have a very bad cough, but the body finds a way of trying to capture the virus. It's like the virus is an enemy.
You seemingly have preempted my second question, which is when the World Health Organization Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom says, and I quote, as the virus moves to low-income countries, we are deeply concerned about the impact it could have among populations with high HIV prevalence and malnourished children. Is that
lockdown? Yeah, so because the human immunodeficiency, the HIV virus, is one of those viruses that cause long-term illnesses, and part of it is to lower the defense mechanism. Specifically, I think HIV is no longer anything new, so much of the population know that we usually take measurements of CD4, or basically what we call cluster of differentiation, which is a type of a cell in the body that confers a defense. It's like the army in the body. There are many other cells in the body, but that's one of them. So it makes that cell go lower, and that makes your immune system go down, or your defense or ability to fight foreign things such as the coronavirus. So that is why the Director General was very concerned about populations such as Africa, where we have a very huge population. In Kenya alone, we have almost 2 million Kenyans living with HIV. But of course, also the story of HIV is a very successful one, that many of our patients also are very well controlled. The virus levels are very low, undetectable.
Fair enough. When it's scientifically proven one to have an immunity that is compromised, what does that mean?
So what that means, there are several ways in which the immunity can be compromised. The immunity can be compromised in its inability to either produce chemicals that can clear off a foreign thing such as the virus, or in its ability to produce cells that can eat foreign things such as the virus. Or sometimes you may have all those things in adequate numbers, but then they are not functional. So either the cells are in good numbers or the chemicals are in good numbers, but they are not functional. So these are some of the things. I think so far what is very important for Kenyans to understand, that yes, coronavirus, or what we call SARS-CoV-2, is an illness that you have to be concerned about because you can spread it to others. But it is also something that you can recover from, of course not by your own. Also, when we talk about recovery, it does not necessarily mean that you stay at home and you recover. What it means is that you are in hospital, we are managing your fever, we are managing your pain, we are helping you breathe, we are trying to treat your cough, so that we try and manage the effects of the virus on you as the body fights it off.
Well, I will want us to move a little bit from the science, but before we do that, when we see countries developed such as Italy with high bed capacity number of ICU and beds, and first one will term as a World Health country, why would people die in such numbers? Is it because nature as well as its role that it has to play?
So it's that's a very important question and concern. I think the people, Kenyans must know one thing, that the number one defense for this virus is you. The number two defense is the healthcare system. We may have a lot of development in terms of the healthcare system, which we really need. And if there's one thing that this COVID-19 pandemic should teach us, is that our healthcare system should always be good, because our healthcare, you can see now the effects. Just one virus has caused havoc in the whole world. Economies are going down. Countries such as Africa, we are going to have nearly the GDP go down to, like it's like you're going to wipe off nearly 2 countries in the whole of Africa. I mean, if you combine the GDP. So really, it should teach us that the healthcare system should be very good. But the reason why the healthcare systems are overwhelmed even out there is because of the numbers that, you can project that at a certain time, we may only have 1,000 people that are critically ill. We may have only 10,000 people visiting hospitals. Like in Kenya, about 2 to 5% of our population visit hospitals every year.
Fair enough.
You can imagine if that 2% comes one day.
Fair enough.
So that's what happens.
We'll come back to the science. Let's now a little bit get to the economics as well. And before I do that, I understand we are joined in studio as well by Kimani Kuria, Molo Member of Parliament. Mheshimiwa, thank you for making time for us. We'll talk of the policies as well. Let's get to the economics and the coins of it and bring in Steve Biko to the discussion. Steve, the latest move by President Uhuru Kenyatta in his earlier press address signaled to a pay cut, the president taking 80%, cabinet secretaries 30%, chief administrative secretaries 30%, and principal secretaries 20%. Given that the Central Bank of Kenya says Kenya needs an injection, rather the economy needs an injection of 122.5 billion shillings, this is borrowing from the IMF and the World Bank. Is this pay cut too little, too late?
First and foremost, I must say that I appreciate what the president has tried to do today. Unfortunately, it's not enough. Unfortunately, it's a bit too late. We've been monitoring what's been happening to China, Italy, South Africa, and I think in terms of what's happening, an economy cannot recover when we're in lockdown. Basically, what he's trying to do is basically give us a lifeline in terms of a stimulus package that can be able to sustain what's really going on. But pay cuts, and I mean, from 10, 20 people, I mean, it's insignificant to what really needs to be done to the economy.
Steve, to be fair to all sides, is it not a good and a starting point to at least initiate this discussion?
See, in terms of war, and allow me to say this virus is actually like a war. In terms of war is when you actually know strong and weak leaders. And unfortunately, there are no half measures in between. What we need is a leader who can actually make the right choice, the right decision to actually be able to sustain right now. What we need to focus on is how do we combat this virus? That's one. Secondly, how do we actually deal with it? Because we cannot deal with this virus if we are all in lockdown and in quarantine. What we need to do is we need to actually invest in healthcare. We need to ensure that we have enough ICU beds, we have the right medication, we have the right masks and what we need and quarantine measures so that we can be able to fight it. And as we're fighting it, we can be able to map out the data in the economy and see what needs to be done in the long term. What we need to do is now fight the virus as we come up with a stimulus package that will be able to look at the recovery of the economy once we know how we're able to handle the virus.
Fair enough. There are those, and these are economists largely, who predict a recession worse than that of 2008, a similar case of the Black Thursday of October 1929, this being the first day of the stock market crash of 1929. Is it as worse as some predict, or is this just sheer predictions?
I think you see like what the doctor said about how the virus affects your body, especially if your immune is already compromised. Let's now look at it from an economic point of view. Our economy is already compromised. Now with the lockdown and the virus, it actually becomes a critical issue. And we are seeing our NSE is actually at its lowest in 17 years. We're looking at manufacturing sector, which is actually grinding to a halt. We're looking at agriculture sector, which is actually at a negative in terms of production. We're looking at the only sectors that were working in the economy, tourism and the service sector. Tourism is dead. Service sector is actually grinding to a halt. So basically, we have an economy that's actually grinding to a halt. So in terms of getting into a recession, we are actually technically in a recession. So what we need is to look at long-term plans beyond once we manage the virus and once you're able to manage the critical cases, because I believe the numbers are going to come in. The Minister for Health, the CS for Health said that we're in a critical aspect of the curve. So once we get in the numbers, now we can be able to map them out to the economy, and you can be able to tell what's going to happen. Well, if you look at Rwanda, we look at South Africa, the numbers are actually a bit ahead. And the doctor said the issue of...
Steve, let me interject you at that point. When you say we are technically in a recession, you mean a global recession or a Kenyan recession?
A Kenyan recession.
A Kenyan
because
recession? For
us, even before the virus and the lockdown issues and the measures being taken, the economy was already in the doldrums. We were already struggling. We had 4 agendas that were supposed to be boosted to be able to put the economy on a path in terms of production. But that is not the case. We have people losing jobs every day. We have companies shutting down. And basically an economy cannot survive, an economy cannot function with a lockdown.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We'll come back to the economy as well. Let me bring in Molo Member of Parliament, Kimani Kuria rather. Mheshimiwa, thank you for making time for us. There are those who at a policy level say, follow what Rwanda has done, follow what South Africa has done, call for a total lockdown. Is that an option now?
We are faced with 2 options. One, if we do a lockdown, that would mean that the informal sector, which is a major driver of our Kenyan economy, then will come to a standstill. And therefore, I'm tempted to believe that we cannot afford to have a lockdown, because if we do, majority of our Kenyans draw their income from border operations, from taxi drivers to hoteliers. And so these people in this informal sector, if you tell them to stay at home, they are going to die of hunger.
What if you tell them stay at home for purposes of their health?
What do they eat for purposes of health? Some of them would rather risk being outside than staying at home. Remember this, 70% of Kenyans eat what they earn that particular day. So they leave in the morning without nothing. So they go and carry one wateja wawili, anapata pesa ya lunch, anatuma nyumbani makimbiza ya lunch. Anafanya squad mbili ya afternoon, anapeleka pesa ya lunch. And that is 70% of our population. So if you tell those people to stay at home and not go to work, unless as a government we come up with subsidies of food and tell them, stay home for the next 14 days, then we are going to bring you food for those 14 days. Then that would work. But you tell people to stay at home and they do not have any food to eat, it's going to be more crisis.
Fair enough. Let me bring Dr. Ouma to the discussion at this point. When the Member of Parliament says we can't have people staying at home for this matter, as a health worker, as a doctor yourself, what's your reaction?
You of course, for us health workers, we can't stay at home. So we
not necessarily health workers, rather the larger population.
Exactly. So and when we thank people for really understanding the work of health workers for now. But I also agree with Mheshimiwa that this is the time that you expose, and Steve has also talked about it, we really expose the long-term or chronic underfunding of social protection. Because right now, if you tell people to stay at home, most of our people, he says 70%, perhaps even more, live from hand to mouth, as he's clearly described it. So unless we have measures so that we are distributing food, we are telling people that we'll pay your rent, we are telling them that we'll give you water, we are telling them that your health, also remember that there are other health issues rather than just COVID, that is covered, it is going to be very difficult for our country. And this is actually the major problem in this response to the pandemic, that majority of our people do not know what to do, because they apply the taxes, they ride the boda, the people on the construction site, that they have to go do that koroga, ndio apate hiyo 200, 500. So this is a big challenge, and I think this is the president's greatest headache, because we also have a huge unemployment, you know, people who graduates who have just been in the streets, they go, they have to write this paper here and there so that they get 1,000 shillings or 100 or have to be sent here and there. And already they are suffering. Even with the partial, we already now a sort of a partial lockdown, already they are suffering. So this is a big problem. And I think we have to look at it from not just an economic impact, but I call it a human rights based impact, because now we are going to look at the 4 things: food, shelter, clothing, and water, if you want to use water as part of water is life, they say. So
fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough, Dr. Omar. Let me throw out this blanket question to the 3 of you. Then if you were someone making a decision over 47 million Kenyans on whether they should stay at home and be safe or work and risk.
If I can go first, sorry. I think the best option still for any country, to be honest, is a lockdown. That's the best option. The only difficulty with it right now is because most of our people will really suffer. So the best decision right now for the president and for the cabinet to do is to mobilize resources, calculate how much we will need to give our people food, to give them shelter, you know, try and work with the landlords, how people will not be able to pay rent for this month, and then do some very short-lived. It has to be very short-lived. So you can do a 3 weeks lockdown, but on the understanding that, okay, your rent is covered, your employer is going to be told not to sack you, you are going to be given food, and this is the way to distribute food, and this is the people that we are targeting. So countries with reserves, you've seen countries with a lot of reserves are actually doing that. So in the absence of that, then it is not possible to do a lockdown.
Good. Kimani Kuria?
I'll go second and say the best option really would be to lock down, as Dr. Ria said. But we need to use data and scientific method to do that. And if we don't get that right, then it would be more catastrophic. And we've been measured, we've been tested on this. We said last week that we are prepared to receive people from other countries, and they will be screened at the airport. There was quarantine facility that will be provided, only for those people to land, and we realized that we're not prepared for such numbers. So we ended up taking those people from one hotel to the other. But if we would say, for example, last year we did an exercise for Huduma number. And that Huduma number was even taking, then after that we did the census. The census, for example, took the paying location of every Kenyan. So if we could harness that data and say, this is our population, this is the livelihoods.
And the demographics of it, isn't it?
Yeah, the demographics. We would even know who out of these 40 million Kenyans will not have food if we lock down for 2 weeks. So if you get that data correct and use it, and then say how much food we need for these people for 2 weeks. So you deliver food for those people for those 2 weeks. Then lock down now completely, get everyone tested, see those ones that now have the virus, quarantine them, put them aside, and then that way we would have known we have dealt with the problem. But if we do not get that right, it would be so catastrophic that if I were the president and my officers cannot assure me that that's possible, then we will not do a lockdown. We'll just continue with what we're doing. My only worry though is if we lock this curfew from I think from 5 p.m. to from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. I don't even think that movements are more chances of more people move during the day than during night.
That's a presidential directive. We'll come to that after this break. I understand we need to take a short commercial break here on Spotlight. Remember, you can be part of this discussion. Tweet us at TV47 Spotlight. We'll be back with this discussion after this break.
Nexus Peterson. Tumefutwa wote.
Yawa, pia wewe.
Tumeachiliwa.
Si pia wewe unaweza anzisha biashara yako.
Na hii economy venye iko tough sana.
But not too tough for Mwananchi Credit.
Tutafanya aje?
Si niko na 5 good cars. We can get a quick logbook loan approved within 6 hours.
Nataka kuanzisha salon na spa. Hii haitatosa.
Si tuko na title deeds pia. We can still get more money using them. Get a quick approval within 6 hours using your logbook or title deed. Do not get stuck. Call Mwananchi Credit today. Si nilikuambia.
You are a big smart joke.
Mwananchi Credit. Investor in people.
Stimuli can be picked from the senses. So you can see here we have the incoming information that is coming in form of the stimuli.
The First World War, the Second World War, of course, is quite much of a spending. And that in post-wars, of course, USA almost emerged as a victor because its economy was quite strong.
The process or the how of gaining evidence so that you can plunge or you can fill in the gap that you have already identified within our first phase of the process.
So we have a variety of categories that we can talk of as vulnerable, where we have the infants and the young children, we have the pregnant and the lactating women, we have the elderly.
Avoid using threatening questions. If you don't tell me today, now are you helping? That's not us. That's not a counseling session. So we say you also avoid what you call a threatening. They should always be avoided at any given time in any counseling session.
Welcome back. Thank you for choosing to stay with us here on Spotlight and for making time for us here on TV47. You can be part of this discussion. Tweet us at TV47KE. The hashtag to use is TV47 Spotlight. Of course, we are discussing coronavirus, COVID-19, the science and the economic impact. And let's continue with the discussion. Dr. Uma, let me ask you this question again. How does one get to identify what they have? Or scientifically, what is the difference between an allergy, a flu, or whether it is a COVID-19 case?
That has been very difficult. That question has been asked quite a number of times. Mm-hmm. So 4 categories that I will talk about. There are people who have the disease that are not showing any signs or symptoms, but they still shed the virus and they are able to transmit it. Then there are people who get very mild illness. They either have, just a full nose or basically what we call nasal blockage, or you just feel like you have a homa or a small running nose. There are people who get chest problems. You feel a bit of tightness or a bit of discomfort in the chest, the real pneumonia, the way it's called now pneumonia. There are those who get the pneumonia. Mm-hmm. And then there are those who now get a combination of those symptoms. They get the body aches, they get the temperatures go up, what we call fever. They get now the flu. They also get problems breathing plus the dry cough, and that's a bit of the severe ones. That's about 20% of people who get it. 60% they just get the very mild symptoms, sometimes not even showing anything. Mm-hmm. But 20% get they get a bit sick. And then there is another 15 to 20% who get very, very sick. They're the ones who we call it, they drown on their own fluids. So the virus causes the body to produce a lot of secretions in the chest, and therefore they drown in their own fluids. And those are the people who may need ICU. Yeah, so it's very difficult for now to differentiate between an allergy, between
flu
just
and-
normal flu.
and
This, I
COVID-19.
think we have said this before, the COVID is actually a form of flu. It's just that it's a severe one. It's very easy to spread also. Yeah,
And we have seen people making grounds for what they could be suffering from based on some of what they feel. The best, I guess, will be to test it, isn't it?
Yeah, right now, in fact, I think that's very important that you said that. We were discussing that today in the task force, that testing now is part of prevention. Because, and Mheshimiwa alluded to it, that, you know, if you lock down the people who are coming in or the people that you suspect, because right now our case definition, or basically how we identify those who are sick, has changed. It is no longer you travel to China or to Europe or to South Africa, because we are now having local transmission. Local transmission means that you got it from someone who is here. So in that case, the best thing is to test. I think the 719, the hotline, is still open. Also, hospitals and many counties have also given various hotlines which are in local radios. When you get sick, try to contact the hospital. Do not, we advise as health workers that you do not go to the hospital, because there's a risk of spreading it to other health workers and even to the other patients who are there.
And
So,
of course,
yes.
I beg, it will be nice to make mention of your travel history at this
Yes,
time.
exactly. Travel history is very important. We generally advise, as we have always advised, that you have to be very honest with the health professionals in terms of your travel history, or at least suspicion of someone that you think traveled from your family or in contact with you. But as we have noted that now we may be getting into that phase, especially in the next few days or the next week, we may be getting into that phase of perhaps people who never traveled anywhere, but they just got it because perhaps someone who traveled was in the same hotel with them or was in the same place with them.
All right, Kosgei Brian at Kosgei Ryan is asking Abubakar, we have seen Nakuru County's stubborn traders not happy with the county government directive to close the market. What's Honorable Kuria Kimani's take on having been a Nakuru County parliamentarian? Mheshimiwa, directed question to you.
I really understand the plight of the traders in those markets, because I said earlier, these are people who they leave in the morning, and when they come back with the evening, that's the only time they come back with the mail. And so when you tell them to close down the market, those people for sure do not know where to go. They do not know what they're going to eat. And that's
Let me interject you at that point. I understand we have a caller on phone, Jeff from Nairobi. Good evening, Jeff.
Hi, how are you, Abubakar?
I'm fine. How about you? What are your thoughts in as far as what we are discussing in studio is concerned?
I'm well, thank you. I'm really enjoying the show, but I wanted to point out a few things from your panelists. Number one, from the good doctor,
Yes.
we are told that there are some self-assessment applications or links that have been going around on WhatsApp. That you can self-assess yourself
Yes.
and answer a few questions, and then be able to know whether you have coronavirus or not. I wanted to know if this is true or not. But then also, I wanted to know, because it is shown there is one recovery,
Yes.
full recovery, would it be ideal to identify who this person is, to at least give testimony of how they even recovered or when they would even help to calm down agents?
Yes.
And then I think our students in university, especially medical students, are now at home, many of them, while others in other countries are actually researching on how to fight a cure or a vaccine for the virus. I would like to hear the thoughts of the panelists
Yes.
on this. Are we sleeping while others are working? Are we expecting the drug to come from elsewhere? While it could be the ones who could probably discover this one. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you. Of course, stay tuned. Your questions, the three I promise, will be answered by this panel. At least they'll give their individual perspective to this. But nonetheless, Mheshimiwa, you're answering that question before we get to the question Jeff has asked. Kindly go ahead.
I was saying I can really identify the plight of markets, of the people that work in the markets in Nakuru, because those are where they draw their livelihoods, na wakifungiwa job yenyewe hakuna mahali wataenda. Na as I said earlier, these are people wenye wanatoka asubuhi, anajua anaenda soko, anakuja na sapa jioni. So huyo mtu ukimfungia hiyo biashara kwa kweli hataelewa. Na ndio maana tulikuwa nasema lazima sasa kutoka kwa hii step twende kwa the next step ya how do we mitigate against people like the people in the juakali sector, people in this informal sector, out ambao kwa soko. Nimeona pia kwa news nafikiri Githurai nao Kiambu County Githurai, so kama soko ya Githurai nayo imefungwa. Wao watu wakifungua soko wataenda wapi? Na hilo ndilo wazo ambalo not just our national government, our county governments pia wachukulie kwamba hili changamoto si la national government peke yao, pia ni changamoto la hao kama viongozi wa county. And especially when I'm talking about the county government, I'm talking about the governor. So lazima tuanze sasa mikakati ya kuhakikisha kwamba hao watu ambao walikuwa kwa soko na hawana chakula ya kula jioni, how can we subsidize them so to make sure huyo mtu ako na chakula na at least hata kama anakaa nyumbani watoto wake watakufa njaa.
Good, and I think that has been a concern lately in the media and even in the streets of what replacement, what will people be offered in as far as what they'll intend to be making for a daily living, and that source can be. We'll come to that a little bit later. Steve, let me bring you to the discussion. I was reading some leftist economists to argue that to avoid a global recession of what could be glaring at us, for countries that have their own currencies, print more, provided you can curb inflation. What are your thoughts in as far as the modern monetary theory is concerned?
I think inflation is a key concern. To that, I don't agree with the leftist kind of thinking. And I think what we need to understand is that every country has its own form of economy. The virus has actually exposed the weaknesses in how we are connected as a global economy. And printing more money will not be a solution because the money will not have any value to it. And at the end of the day, money needs to have a value for it to actually be of purpose. And the element of production and purpose to life needs to be relevant. Allow me to digress a bit. You see, the issue about how we are going to avoid a recession, when you're looking at the issue of, for example, the issue of lockdown, a couple of things that we need to look at. You see, one, the Public Health Act is insufficient in terms of being able to address the pandemic. The President, the CS for Health and the governors are using the Public Health Act to actually manage this, and it's insufficient.
Insufficient in what way?
It's insufficient in terms of being able to manage, because this is why you're seeing traders in Nakuru, traders in Kiambu, traders in Bungoma complaining about being told to go home, because at the end of the day, the government and both national and county will be staring at legal suits to be able to recover lost money, because at the end of the day, the public health, I mean, it's inferior to the constitution. So for a lockdown to actually be effective and for true leaders to emerge, we need a state of emergency. We need a proper lockdown. Parliament needs to approve this, because only under state of emergency is when the president can have powers to actually tell someone, stay at home. You cannot open your business. You cannot move from here to there. The Public Health Act is insufficient. It cannot just lock me down from moving from one place to another. So this is a problem. And I think we have what we need to address the problem, but we're doing half measures. And for me, I think the country will suffer more, not from the virus, but from the ripple effect of how we've been able to manage this. One, from false news going around, fake news on social media, two, applying wrong measures to situation, and three, a lot of panicking around the situations. Because one, with the state of emergency, the president can actually tell traders to stay at home. Yeah, it gives him the power to actually arrest and charge you if you don't follow the law. With the Public Health Act, I mean, honestly, what are you going to charge me with? It's insufficient. And if we're not careful, traders can come together and actually riot. And we've seen what's happening in Italy, we've seen what's happening in Iran, we've seen what's happening in South Africa. Even with South Africa actually having the military on the streets, they had to have a state of emergency for 21 days. And
at that point, Steve, rather than the military being on the street, rather than the government forcing you to either stay at home or stay at a confined place, should it not be a personal responsibility as well?
Well, to be honest, how am I going to be responsible for you when I'm hungry? When my children are crying for food? When my business is closing down? Humans by nature, we are selfish. So first and foremost, I'll be thinking about myself. I need to feed. I need to take care of my interest. So before I start thinking about you, I'll be thinking about myself. And that's why we've seen irresponsible leadership. Kilifi deputy governor, for example, doing whatever he was doing, because naturally we are selfish. So we need proper laws, and the Constitution gives the president the mandate to actually declare.
Steve, I think you have made the point clear. Let's get to answer Jeff's question. Jeff is the caller who had called us earlier on, asking 3 questions, and then let me start with you, Mheshimiwa, at a policy level on this. He asks of our students being at home while other students are in laboratories trying to invent some cure for this. Is this a failure of our institutions, or is it an exaggeration?
The assumption Jeff is making is that for one, research can only be done by students, and 2, research can only be done at the university. And if we look at this, what is the pro and cons of having these students in the university and having them at home? And you see, that would be like a university like Kenyatta University has a population of I think 40,000 plus students. So the medical school there would be like 1,000. So where will these people be at? How many people would be at the lab?
But if this is their lifetime subject of research and understanding and intellectual capacity, shouldn't they be helping in inventing some of what can be used as a defense?
As a country, we have researchers, we have professors, we have doctors, both at the universities and even in the Ministry of Health and even in the public health sector. So I think in terms of research, we have enough people that are out there doing this research. We even have research institutions and like KEMRI, whose mandate is only to do research. So research is not just done by university students. Research is done by many other people like doctors, those PhD holders, those people in the ministry. And then in any case, we cannot claim to be the best even in research, because how many inventions have we done in the country? So instead of risking...
There's no harm in trying, isn't it?
There is no harm in trying, but if in that trying we put more people into danger and you have more cases to deal with, then we are better off relying on research of those few people that are doing the research and the research of other countries that are our partners, and even like institutions like the World Health Organization.
Let me bring Dr. Ouma to the discussion. Jeff is equally asking of self-assessment. In this case, can one know their status by basically answering some questions online or otherwise?
I have seen some messages going around on WhatsApp. I think what Jeff and the members of the public, citizens, need to know is that please listen to information that is being advertised from the World Health Organization and also from the Ministry of Health. This information keeps changing. As we have told you, it is very difficult to identify or differentiate one set of symptoms for another disease from this of COVID. So I think you're better off ignoring the message unless the only portal that I know that is government run is the one for South Africa, that they have a WhatsApp number. But you are not in South Africa. Every country is different, and I think Mheshimiwa and Steve have also mentioned that every country is very different. So even our case definition, and what I mean by case definition is that what we call a disease here, I mean in terms of corona or what we want to test, is also different from perhaps what South Africa will do. So we were actually changing some of those messages. You will see a bit of a shift in terms of the message now. We are no longer pre-pandemic, means that we did not have the disease. So we were telling you things to do when we did not have the disease. Now we have the disease. So even the messages of what we will tell you now that we have the disease will change. And I think I want to support Mheshimiwa's point about the issue of medical student. Yes, when you are a medical student, and I hope Jeff is one, your role is 3. 1 is that you have to add to the body of knowledge. Number 2 is that you must learn how to be capable and have the right skills to treat people. And number 3 is that then you must be able to interact with others and be able to educate them. So you teach, you research, and you treat. So those are the three works of a doctor or a medical student, and I think it's there in the auth. So I think Jeff and the other colleagues will be there, so they will have enough time to research on this. But even beyond that, coronaviruses are things we were taught in medical school. There are several of them. There are about 7 of them. This one is just one of them in terms of that's causing the disease. And the last question was the issue of the recovery.
We'll come to that. Still on the question of self-assessment, rather than more than just the self-testing kits, which I believe more than self-testing using those kits, can one know their status by basically going through more of what the symptoms are and comparing what they have?
You can suspect yourself, and right now we allow people to suspect. I think the media has done quite a good job in terms of educating people. So yes, if you have a cough, if you're sneezing, if you have a flu, if you have a fever, the difference, and let me say this, the difference between COVID and now asthma or allergy or just normal flu is that you may have a fever. I said that at least 40%, there's a 20% that will get sick, and then there's another 20% that will get very sick. But there's a 60% that may not have any fever. But fever is actually the differentiating thing, is what makes it different from either asthma or allergy, because those ones you don't develop a fever. But I've also mentioned that 60% of people may also not develop a fever. So, and some may even just be normal.
There can never be a surety till it is scientifically proven
till it is tested. And we don't advocate for self-testing. Yesterday, of course, we received quite a lot of donations. I hope that they'll be distributed from tomorrow. But and then the testing centers are going to increase from 5 to 15 by next week. So we will have a number of KEMRI sites from Kisumu to Alupe in Busia to Kilifi to Mombasa, the Aga Khans. We have the University of Nairobi laboratory, we have the National Influenza Laboratory. So we are going to increase the centers to 15 just to enable so many other people be tested, including the KEMRI in Kericho. We'll have another center in Nakuru. So there will be more centers that can be able to test. We do not advocate for self-testing.
Good. We'll come to the question of the identification of the recovered patient and whether it is necessary or not. But I understand we also need to take another short break here on Spotlight. We'll be back after this break.
Coronavirus COVID-19 is a respiratory virus spreading across the world. The infection is spread from droplets of coughing and sneezing of an infected person, touching or shaking hands, or being in contact with contaminated surfaces or objects with the virus. The signs and symptoms are fever, coughing, headache, body ache, difficulty in breathing. The disease can be prevented by regularly washing hands with soap and running water. Avoid close contact with people who have flu-like symptoms. Avoid handshake, hugs, and kissing. Also, protect yourself by covering your mouth or nose using a disposable tissue while coughing or sneezing. If you experience these symptoms and you had traveled or been in contact with a person from a country reporting COVID-19, you should isolate yourself for 14 days and seek immediate medical attention or report to the nearest health center. This message has been brought to you by the government of Kenya and its partners. For accurate information on COVID-19, dial *719# or call 719. Follow us on Twitter at MOH_Kenya, at spokesperson GOK, at WHO.
Science and the impact of COVID-19 to the economy and, of course, the health of individuals and the global health is what we are discussing here on Spotlight. Welcome back. Let's continue with the discussion. And Steve, let me get you back to the discussion, and this touches on the economy as well. We've seen the Central Bank of Kenya cut its 2020 economic growth forecast from the initial 6.2% to 3.4%. If this is to last for a period that is unspecified, and this being the lowest rate since 2008, is 3.4 workable, doable?
One, I think it's too optimistic, given the true state of the economy, without really bringing in the ripple effect of the virus, because the macro aspect of it in terms of agro-processing, agriculture, tourism, manufacturing, production, import-export. Import-export is basically dead. Tourism is dead. Manufacturing is grinding to a halt. So unless now a stimulus package is going to actually be done to the manufacturing sector to boost local production for medical supplies and local consumption, 3.5 is actually very hopeful, very, very positive. But I think given the light of how things are, it's prudent that we remain hopeful and positive. And I'm hoping that this can be a wake-up call to the policy makers to ensure that we actually refocus our energy and policy decision and finances to what is needed. Right now, what I know is that 3.5 probably just come from local spending by the government. And given today's the presidential speech that focusing on actually reducing funding of development projects and government expenditure, it's too optimistic, but it's good to be.
And still on the point of optimism, the Monetary Policy Committee decided to lower the central bank's rate to 7.25% from 8.25%.
That is irrelevant. That has no impact at the moment. Right now, the focus is on the health, economic of the people and the country. So whatever central bank has actually decided is actually pointless for now, because that will come in focus in the next 4-5 months.
And how do you say this is pointless, if at all it will inject 35.2 billion shillings to additional liquidity
into the economy, and how is that money going to do anything? I mean, how is it going to help a trader who runs a barber shop with 5 employees who've been told to go home because of the virus? I'm looking at right now. We need to focus on combating the virus. We need to focus on actually injecting capital into the health aspect of this country. We need to give money to the CS for health. We need to look at how many ICU beds we have. We need to look at how many testing kits we have. We need to increase number of testing centers. We need to actually focus on sorting this thing out first before we're looking at sorting out the economy. As I've said earlier on, the economy cannot function in a lockdown. And what central bank has done is prudent, and it's good. But at the end of the day, it's not really having a direct impact on what needs to be done. What central bank has done will be of positive news if we're looking at post the virus aspect. We're looking at how do we stimulate the economy to grow, how do we stimulate manufacturing, how do we stimulate local tourism, how do we stimulate local transport sectors and things like that.
And so we'll come to the aftershocks and the recovery a little bit later, and I understand our time is not on our side. Let me get to Kimani Kuria, Molo Member of Parliament, on the question Jeff asked earlier on the identification of persons. Is it necessary to identify who has recovered? He said sharing testimonies.
One thing, I think it's important to protect the privacy of the patients, because there's usually stigma, especially stigma associated with something called a virus, and this disease that people do not understand. And therefore, exposing such a patient would really make the patient of that person the life of that person difficult. How do you go and meet him when he knows he had that virus? Then the question would be, are you really sure that he has really recovered or he has really recovered? So I really don't think that it is important for us or for that person to be coerced to or their identification to be known. I think but if they want to come out and say, I have been unwell and now I'm well, then by their own way, then that would
without being coerced, isn't it?
But without being coerced. But allow me to contribute a little to what the economics question that you had asked earlier. That lowering of the rate by central bank is not useless, and I will differ with economist Beek on that. Because if these banks have more liquidity, then most of the time they'll get creative on how they're going to get rid of that liquidity. So, for example, if a barber shop, for example, has 5 employees, so the owner of that barber shop can actually get an advance from the bank as a loan to advance respectively to the employees, and then there could be even a break of when they can start repaying. So that even as much as we're saying the government should do something in supporting this, if that money is available to these business people and they advance it to the employees, not for any development but at least for them to stay afloat until this pandemic goes, then that would be something good for the economy, because the real solution to dealing with this is not just going to be won by the government, but it's about putting the banking sector, the private sector, so that everyone is humane, so there's humanity back in us, and we try to do something to make sure at least that our people are safe and they're healthy.
Good. Let me ask Dr. Uma the same question on the identification of persons who may have recovered, who have recovered from this particular COVID-19.
I think Mheshimiwa has answered the question perfectly well.
As a medic?
If by their own, no, as medics, of course, we take oaths about confidentiality of patients, so you're sure you will not see any doctor or nurse talking about that. The only thing that can happen is by their own themselves, the patient or the person coming out. And I also want to say that recovery here means that testing negative in at least 2 separate tests 24 hours apart. So after you had tested positive and you were on treatment. So that is what recovery means. Of course, there are thousands out there who have recovered. And that is something that I agree with Jeff that perhaps it would be a good thing, but it's only the people themselves who can choose to do that, not the health system. Yeah.
At that point, is there a probability of reinfection of someone who has recovered?
There has been reports of reinfection. There has been reports of reinfection. Now, what we do not know, because in other countries there are so many cases. You find there are 5,000 cases, 6,000 cases, 10,000 cases. So there are people who have been discharged from hospital and then come back to hospital again with the infection. So we don't know whether it's the virus that has what we call recrudescence. We don't call it reinfection, or someone, and then being infected again, which is now reinfection. So that is still a subject of research. So there's still a lot that we are still finding out. There's also a lot that we already know. I think what is most important for people is to, social distance, make sure you observe cough and sneeze hygiene, hand washing, go to hospital, but make sure you notify the hospital. We have the hotline numbers that people need to
by the Ministry of Health, of course,
to use.
I'll give you your closing remarks, but nonetheless, Preacher Kid 254 on Twitter is asking, most of us out here, we don't understand the figures as they were put by Mr. President concerning the VAT. In simpler terms, can the panel tell us if the prices of commodities is going up or it is lowering? Steve, let me give you an opportunity to react to that.
I think first and foremost, the reason why the measures are to take effect 1st of April is for Parliament to convene and approve or disapprove. So we're yet to see that. But basically what the President is trying to do is alleviate the suffering and ease the burden in terms of logistics, in terms of food and everything like that. So you're seeing reduction of VAT from 16 to 14. You're seeing the reduction of income tax from 30 to 25. You're seeing 100% tax-free for everyone who earns 24,000 and below. Presumptive tax that is actually for SMEs going to 1%. So these are, I lack the term to actually say because I expected more to be done, but it's a step, it's half a step in the right direction.
Not a full step, not a fast step?
No,
it
will not reduce the price of food, it will not reduce the cost of fuel, it will not reduce the cost of transportation, but it's a conversation starter on what needs to be done. And Mheshimiwa has said that the measures by central bank are not useless, and I agree with him. They're not useless if done under the right environment. If we have a state of emergency where the President will convene banks and order them to actually ensure that there is liquidity for them to actually loan to every business that is registered. And if Huduma Number was an honest and genuine program, this is the time for it to actually come into activation and help in terms of social protection. But unfortunately, we are a country full of corruption and policies that are done for major creation.
Steve, I understand we are out of time. Dr. Omar Oluga, finally, if someone is watching this, and there are a lot of talks of people deciding not to believe whether this is a serious case and a global threat as it is, to someone who is watching us now, what is the scientific equation, if not evidence, that you will give that they take this more seriously, and more so the guidelines put by the World Health Organization and the Ministry of Health?
Yeah, this
in less than a minute.
Yeah, this is quite serious. I think COVID is real. Previously, we were just talking about it. Now it is real. Now you cannot travel. If you want to prove that the virus is real, there's no air travel. You can see courts are closed. I mean, it is real. You can see you are being urged to now close the market, to stay at home. It is real. And the first and foremost protection is you. The virus does not spread. It is you that spreads it. So if you keep measures, if you keep hygiene, if you stay at home, you will stop the spread, and then we can deal with it, because the healthcare system was made for people who generally get sick, not people who generally get sick very fast and then it's overwhelmed. It's not like a marketplace that can accommodate everyone. I think the last thing that I want to say is that for us,
in 30 seconds, I understand.
We want to tell Kenyans to keep safe for us, because we cannot keep at home. We will continue to go to work. And if you get sick, then you are endangering our own lives as healthcare workers, and you're endangering the lives of the Kenyans who are seeking dialysis, who have to depend on hospital for ICU, who are there because they have asthma, because they have diabetes, because they are pregnant and they have to deliver. So please keep safe, because that's the only way you keep us safe. And lastly is to thank the president for giving one health workers an assurance that more of them will be employed. I think there's been additional 1 billion, and we want to say that this recruitment should happen very, very, very soon, so that the healthcare system is not overwhelmed.
Thank you. In 30 seconds, Mheshimiwa Kimani Kuria, Molo Member of Parliament, we have seen the President say he and his deputy urging the Cabinet Secretaries, the Chief Administrative Secretaries, the Principal Secretaries to take a pay cut. Should Members of Parliament also take a pay cut?
That's voluntary. I think at this particular time, it's time for everyone and every Kenyan to take responsibility to try to help where they can. If helping is taking a pay cut, then that will do. But we're also using our income and making sure that we even try to cushion as many of our constituents as we can about this pandemic. But most importantly, for me, this is the time for a country to learn and to know that there are more that unites us than that divides us. And the same unity in which we've dealt with this coronavirus, the way we've reacted, the way we've been strategic, the way we've been on the lookout, if only we continue with this on our daily lives, then Kenya will be a much better place. And lastly, I look forward to our opening Parliament and approving what the President said about reduction of taxes. And this also could be a good time for us to reduce the tax burden of Kenyans, because we are taxing you. So
and tax relief, that has been a word.
And the tax relief.
Thank you, thank you. Molo Member of Parliament Kimani Kuria, Steve Biko, economist, and Dr. Omar Oluga, the Secretary General of Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists and Dentists Union, KMPDU. Thank you for making time for us. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's edition of Spotlight. I'm Abubakar Abdullahi. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, wash your hands, and of course, keep distance. Good night, and God bless.